The first gunshot ripped through the cold Montana morning like a lightning strike echoing across the silent stretch of pine grove forest. 6-year-old Lily Carter stopped dead in her tracks. Her small frame bundled in a puffy red jacket stood frozen as a second shot rang out, sending a flock of startled birds screeching into the gray sky ahead. Beyond a row of pines, 3 men in camouflage trudged through the snow, rifles raised, eyes locked on the steel enclosure just beyond the ridge. "Kid, back away!" One of them barked, panic in his voice. "That thing's not safe." But Lily didn't move. She did the one thing no one could have expected. She ran toward it, toward the black mass pacing behind the chain-link fence, toward the creature 4 times her size with amber eyes that gleamed like molten gold in the morning light, toward Shadow. Her mother, Dr. Rachel Carter, watched in horror from the trail below. Her voice caught in her throat. "Lily, no." But Lily was already there, standing between the men and the massive beast behind the fence. She raised a single hand, not with fear, but with certainty. Shadow stopped pacing. His ears twitched, then he sat. "You can't hurt him," Lily said, her voice stronger than her size should allow. "He's mine." The men stared, dumbfounded. The girl and the wolf-dog locked eyes. The air seemed to still, time holding its breath. That moment, the split second where child and creature understood each other without a word, would later be described in courtrooms, on talk shows, and in scientific journals. But back then, it was just a scared mother, a stunned group of hunters, and a girl with a secret and a mark. They said Lily had never been like other kids. From the moment she was born, Rachel had sensed something different in her daughter. She didn't cry much, didn't babble, didn't respond to smiles or lullabies. At first, Rachel blamed herself. She was a single mom now. Mark, her husband and Lily's father, had passed away in a logging accident before Lily turned 2. Raising a child alone while running a small-town veterinary clinic was hard enough. Raising one with a diagnosis of severe autism spectrum disorder was something else entirely. Lily rarely spoke. She avoided touch. But strangest of all was the birthmark, a faint but unmistakable outline of a wolf-paw etched on her left wrist. Doctors called it a congenital nevus. Rachel called it a mystery. Desperate to help her daughter connect with the world, Rachel tried everything: therapy dogs, playgroups, even music therapy. Nothing worked until she met Frank Weston. His husky sanctuary sat on the edge of nowhere, a few miles past the state highway, hidden by trees and time. The man himself was wiry, weathered, with ice-blue eyes that seemed to look straight through you. "I've got one left," he said that day, walking them past a dozen enclosures. "He's different." He led them to a small pen where a black pup sat quietly, watching, not barking, not pacing, just watching. The moment Lily saw him, something changed. She walked forward, unaided, unprompted, and placed her tiny hand against the wire. The pup stood and patted over. He pressed his nose to the spot where her palm met the fence. Rachel gasped. It was the first time Lily had initiated contact with anyone, human or animal. Frank's gaze dropped to Lily's wrist. When he saw the mark, his expression shifted, almost like recognition. "Well," he said softly, "the wolf has found her." Shadow came home that afternoon. Rachel had her doubts. His price was strangely low, his paperwork vague, but something in her daughter's eyes told her this was the right move. And it was at first. Within days, Lily began whispering to him. By the end of the first week, she was speaking full sentences, but only to Shadow. She laughed for the first time in months. She played. She drew pictures, always of a black wolf and a little girl with stars above their heads. But the pup grew fast, faster than any dog Rachel had ever treated. At 4 months, Shadow weighed 60 pounds. By 6 months, he was taller than Lily. His eyes glinted with intelligence that unsettled Rachel. His reactions were too fast, his behavior too measured. Not a husky. Not entirely. Still, he was gentle, always with Lily. Protective, even. One night, a neighbor's dog wandered too close to their yard. Shadow didn't bark. He stood still, muscles coiled, eyes tracking the intruder. Only when Lily walked outside and touched his flank did he relax. "You ever seen a dog like that?" Rachel asked her friend and fellow vet, Dr. Mason. No, he replied. I don't think that's a dog at all. The whispers. Then came the whispers in town. Did you hear about Rachel Carter's wolf? People asked. They let that thing sleep next to a kid. The hunters who appeared near the woods that morning weren't poachers. They were neighbors, scared once. And now they were staring down a child with fire in her eyes and a creature that refused to flinch. One of them lowered his gun. She's got it under control, he muttered. The others hesitated, then one by one they stepped back. Rachel reached Lily seconds later, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms around her daughter. What were you thinking? He was scared, Lily whispered. I had to help. Rachel looked past her daughter to the black creature behind the fence. Shadow's amber eyes met hers, and for the first time, Rachel understood. He wasn't just a therapy animal or even a pet. He was something else entirely. Shadow's growth was nothing short of extraordinary. Within months, he had outpaced the size of any domestic dog Rachel had ever encountered. His once puppy-like demeanor evolved into something more profound, exhibiting an intelligence that bordered on the uncanny. Lily, too, underwent a transformation. Her previously limited interactions blossomed into full conversations, but only with Shadow. The bond between them was palpable, a silent understanding that needed no words. Concerned about Shadow's rapid development and the whispers circulating in Pine Grove, Rachel decided it was time for answers. She scheduled an appointment with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a renowned wildlife geneticist at the University of Montana. During the examination, Dr. Vasquez meticulously collected samples from Shadow, her brow furrowing with each observation. He's exhibiting characteristics uncommon in domestic breeds, she noted, her voice tinged with curiosity. We'll need to run comprehensive DNA analyses. Days turned into an agonizing week before the results arrived. Rachel sat across from Dr. Vasquez, the sterile scent of the clinic amplifying her anxiety. Rachel, Dr. Vasquez began, her tone measured. Shadow's DNA results are unexpected. He possesses approximately 87% Northwestern wolf DNA, 9% Siberian Husky, and the remaining percentage is an undetermined hybridization. Rachel's heart sank. What does this mean for us? Dr. Vasquez sighed, removing her glasses. In Montana, owning a high-percentage wolf hybrid is legal, but there are stringent regulations. Animals with 50% or higher wolf content must have permanent identification and adhere to specific containment standards. Given Shadow's genetic makeup, he qualifies as a high-content wolfdog. The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on Rachel. The law was clear, and the safety of both Lily and the community was paramount. Reluctantly, she made the heart-wrenching decision to relocate Shadow to Wild Haven Reserve, a sanctuary specializing in wolf hybrids. The day of the separation was overcast, mirroring the somber mood. Lily clung to Shadow, her tears soaking into his thick fur. You promised we'd never be apart, she cried, her voice breaking. Shadow nuzzled her gently, his amber eyes reflecting a sorrow that words couldn't capture. Margaret Ellis, the founder of Wild Haven, observed the exchange with a heavy heart. We'll take good care of him, Lily, she assured, though her words offered little comfort. As the gates of Wild Haven closed behind Shadow, Lily's world dimmed. The vibrant colors of her drawings faded. Her laughter silenced. Rachel watched helplessly as her daughter retreated into a shell thicker than before. At Wild Haven, Shadow's transformation was equally profound. He refused food, his once luminous coat losing its sheen. Margaret and her team tried various methods to engage him, but his spirit seemed tethered to the little girl he had left behind in Pine Grove. The community buzzed with mixed reactions. Some praised Rachel's responsible decision, while others whispered about the mystical connection between Lily and Shadow. The legend of the wolf-marked children resurfaced, tales of children born with wolf-like birthmarks, destined to bond with the wild. One evening, as Rachel closed the clinic, Frank Weston appeared at her door. His rugged demeanor was softened by a look of genuine concern. I heard about Shadow, he began, removing his hat. There's something you should know. Rachel gestured for him to sit, her curiosity piqued. I'm listening. Frank took a deep breath. Years ago, I was part of a project, Bridge Wolf. We aimed to preserve wolf genetics by integrating them with domestic breeds. Shadow is one of those rare hybrids. Rachel's eyes widened. Why didn't you tell me this before? I didn't think it mattered, Frank admitted, guilt evident in his tone. But seeing the bond between Lily and Shadow, it's unlike anything I've ever witnessed. The revelation added another layer to the intricate tapestry of Lily and Shadow's connection. It wasn't merely companionship. It was destiny intertwined with genetics and ancient lore. Determined to help her daughter, Rachel sought the counsel of Joseph Greyfeather, a respected elder of the local indigenous community. He listened intently as Rachel recounted the events, his expression thoughtful. "The mark your daughter bears," he said slowly, "is known among our people as the wolf's embrace. It's a sign of a profound bond between human and wolf, a relationship that transcends the physical realm." Rachel's skepticism wavered in the face of Joseph's conviction. "What should I do?" "Trust," Joseph advised. "Trust in their connection. Sometimes the answers lie not in science, but in the spaces between, where spirit and nature converge." Armed with this newfound perspective, Rachel resolved to find a way to reunite Lily and Shadow, believing that their bond held the key to healing for both her daughter and the Wolfdog. The air at Wildhaven was cooler than Pine Grove, crisp and dry, with the scent of pine and earth lingering on every breeze. But for Shadow, it might as well have been airless. Since arriving at the sanctuary, he hadn't eaten a full meal. He paced the perimeter of his enclosure with mechanical regularity, occasionally sitting by the fence where he could catch glimpses of the road. Waiting, always waiting. Margaret Ellis stood beside Dr. Logan Pierce, the sanctuary's head biologist, watching the wolf dog from a distance. "He's shutting down," Margaret murmured. "He's grieving." Logan adjusted his glasses, concern etched across his face. "He's not like the others. His responses are more conscious. I've never seen a hybrid react to separation this way." Meanwhile, back in Pine Grove, Lily had slipped back into the silence that once defined her world. She no longer reached for her picture books. Her once colorful crayon sketches turned into jagged, chaotic scribbles, if she picked up crayons at all. She barely ate, barely slept. Rachel could only watch as her daughter drifted into emotional exile. One night, Rachel found Lily curled up on the floor of her room, whispering something. At first, she thought it was gibberish, but when she leaned in, she recognized the words, "Shadow, wait for me." That was the final straw. The next morning, Rachel packed a small bag and drove Lily to Wildhaven, desperate and uncertain. Margaret met them at the entrance, her expression unreadable. "We don't normally allow outside visitors into private enclosures," she said, then paused. "But this isn't a normal situation." Shadow was lying under a tree when Lily approached, flanked by Rachel and 2 staff members. He didn't lift his head at first, but the moment Lily stepped forward and whispered his name, Shadow, his ears twitched. Then he rose. The transformation was immediate and astonishing. The wolfdog's entire posture changed. He walked, not ran, up to the fence, eyes locked on the little girl he thought he had lost. Without hesitation, Lily placed her palm against the wire mesh. Shadow gently pressed his forehead to it. For a long time, they just stood like that, connected by silence and steel. "God," Margaret whispered, hand over her mouth. Rachel's knees buckled, and she sank to the bench behind her. "I didn't think he'd remember her like that." Logan stared, barely blinking. "This isn't just recognition. This is attunement." In the following days, Margaret made an unorthodox decision. Allow Lily to become a junior volunteer under full supervision. She could spend structured time with Shadow, help feed him through safe gates, observe his behaviors, and even participate in enrichment activities. Rachel hesitated at first, but Joseph Greyfeather, who had stayed in contact, offered his quiet counsel. Let the bond teach her. It may do more than any therapy ever could. And so began a remarkable new chapter. Lily visited every day after school. She would sit outside the enclosure with a sketch pad, noting Shadow's movements, drawing him in varying states of rest, play, and alertness. Over time, she developed her own shorthand, strange symbols and arrows pointing to ears, tails, paws. Margaret and Logan noticed something else. Shadow responded to Lily's hand signals in ways he didn't to anyone else. A wave meant sit. A tap to the knee meant stay. A curled finger meant roll. At first, they thought it was coincidence. Then Logan set up a video experiment. Lily entered the observation pen and used a series of gestures. Shadow obeyed each one with near military precision. "How did you teach him that?" Logan asked afterward, bewildered. "I didn't," Lily said softly. "We just understand." The footage stunned even the most seasoned staff. Margaret sent it anonymously to a colleague at Stanford. The reply was immediate. "This level of nonverbal communication is unheard of outside of primate studies. Are you sure that's a wolf hybrid?" In town, word began to spread. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered of danger. At a local town meeting, resident Henry Weller stood and declared, "That girl is controlling a wild animal with hand signs. That's not natural. That's possession or something." But Sheriff David Monroe, who had visited the sanctuary himself, stood up and said, "I saw the two of them together, and I'll tell you what's unnatural. How that animal becomes a lamb in her presence. If anything, she's calming him, not provoking him." The divide grew, but so did the intrigue. Meanwhile, Logan began running genetic simulations based on the earlier DNA results. What he found disturbed and fascinated him. There was a unique marker in Shadow sequencing, one he'd never seen before. When cross-referenced with Lily's blood work from old pediatric reports Rachel provided, something peculiar emerged. A mirrored sequence, a shared mutation, a bridge. Logan called Margaret into the lab. "I think we're looking at more than just a bond. This may be genetic resonance, something passed down across species." Rachel said, "Lily was born with a wolf-paw-shaped birthmark." Margaret nodded slowly. "This isn't just rare, Logan. This is unheard of." But something else was changing. Subtle signs in Shadow's behavior. He was sleeping more, eating slower. Lily, too, had started complaining of leg pains, occasional headaches. Rachel chalked it up to stress, but her instincts were on high alert. And then, one evening, Lily fell asleep on the car ride home from Wildhaven. Rachel noticed her daughter's wrist twitching, as if reaching for something in her dreams. And she whispered a single word in her sleep: blood. What neither of them knew was that the connection they shared had only just begun to reveal its full depth. The summer sun had begun to lose its edge, retreating earlier each evening, as if the sky itself sensed a coming shift. At Wildhaven, the leaves flirted with golden tones, and the forest exhaled that unmistakable scent of change. But inside the sanctuary's medical wing, the air was sterile, quiet, far removed from the crisp wilderness outside. Shadow lay on the padded floor of the examination room, unusually still. His breaths were shallow, measured, as if conserving energy. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood beside a small ultrasound monitor, her gloved hands trembling slightly. Margaret Ellis hovered behind her, arms crossed tightly. "You're sure?" Margaret asked. Dr. Vasquez didn't answer at first. She froze the image on the screen, pointing to a faint shadow on the Wolfdog spleen. "There's a mass," she said quietly. "It wasn't there 2 months ago." Margaret's stomach turned. "Cancer? Hemangiosarcoma. Aggressive. Internal bleeding could begin at any time," Vasquez sighed. "We'll do a biopsy to confirm, but we need to prepare ourselves." When Rachel Carter received the call, she was in the kitchen, watching Lily quietly sketch at the table. The little girl hadn't said much all day. Her usual questions, "Can we go see Shadow early? Did he eat today?" had stopped without explanation. Rachel knew something was wrong, but she didn't expect the phone call to come with news that would knock the air from her lungs. "He's sick," Rachel whispered, sitting across from Lily. "The doctors found something inside Shadow. They think it might be cancer." Lily didn't react at first. She stared at her drawing, a detailed sketch of Shadow lying under a tree, and then looked up. "I know," she said simply. Rachel blinked. "What do you mean, you know?" "I feel it," Lily whispered. "His blood, it's wrong. It's tired." Later that week, during a routine pediatric checkup, Rachel mentioned Lily's increasing fatigue and sudden loss of appetite. The pediatrician ordered blood work, just to be safe. 3 days later, Rachel sat frozen in a hospital corridor as a hematologist explained the impossible. "Your daughter has acute myeloid leukemia," the doctor said gently. "It's rare and aggressive, but we caught it early." "No," Rachel murmured. "No, this isn't real." But it was. Within the span of a week, both Lily and Shadow had been diagnosed with deadly blood diseases. The parallel was chilling. What were the odds? Margaret called an emergency meeting at Wild Haven. Rachel, Logan Pierce, Dr. Vasquez, and Joseph Greyfeather gathered in the main lodge. "I don't believe in coincidences," Margaret began. "And neither does science. Not when two beings this bonded, this genetically unique, get sick at the exact same time. I've been running simulations," Logan said, opening his laptop. "Lily and Shadow share a mutation, a rare genetic variant I've never seen. It's not just similar. It's nearly identical in function and location. I'm calling it the bridge gene." Rachel leaned forward. "You're saying it's real? This thing Joseph talked about. It actually exists." Joseph nodded solemnly. "Our people have known of it for centuries. Children marked by wolves, born with the paw print. They're the chosen ones. They walk between our world and the wild." He gestured to Lily's wrist. "That mark, it's not random. It's ancestral memory made flesh." Everyone turned toward Frank Weston, who had been uncharacteristically quiet in the corner. The old man finally spoke, his voice gravelly. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "I knew what Shadow was the day I saw Lily's birthmark. I knew she was one of them." "One of what?" Rachel snapped. "Bridge children," Frank replied. "Shadow came from a bloodline protected for generations by a group I was part of. We called ourselves the Wardens of the Line. Our job was to preserve the bridge wolves, those capable of bonding with humans who shared their marker." "Why didn't you say anything?" Rachel demanded. "Because we were being hunted," Frank replied. "For decades, private collectors, geneticists with more money than ethics, try to track these wolves. If anyone knew Shadow had been placed with a marked child." He trailed off. Logan stood up abruptly. "There's a treatment protocol. It's radical, experimental, but it might give them both a chance." Everyone turned to him. "Stem cell transplant. Cross-species," he took a breath. "We take Shadow's bone marrow and try to transplant it into Lily. And maybe vice versa. Their gene alignment, this bridge gene, might allow the body to accept the transplant without full rejection." Rachel's mouth opened in disbelief. Logan, that's never been done. You're talking about a wolf donating stem cells to a human child." Logan nodded. "I know. It's insane. But right now, it's our best shot." Joseph stepped forward. "There is another step," he said. Everyone looked at him. "There is a ceremony, old, sacred. Before the healing can happen, the bond must be acknowledged by the spirits of both worlds. If you want to proceed with science," he looked at Rachel, "you must also accept the mystery." Rachel didn't hesitate. She reached across the table and took Lily's sketchbook. She flipped to a page, one Rachel hadn't noticed before. It showed Lily and Shadow standing under a full moon. Between them was a glowing thread, like light or blood. It ran from his heart to hers. "They already know," Rachel said. "They've known all along." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees surrounding Wild Haven. Somewhere in the deeper part of the sanctuary, Shadow lifted his head and turned toward the cabin where Lily now lay asleep. The bond had been formed in silence. Now it will be tested in blood. The night before the transplant, the sky over Pine Grove was painted in deep indigo, pierced by 1,000 trembling stars. At the heart of Wild Haven Reserve, a sacred fire crackled quietly within a ring of ancient stones. The ceremony was simple. No chanting, no spectacle. Just silence, smoke, and a circle of those who understood the weight of what was to come. Lily sat wrapped in a woven blanket, her small frame pale and fragile beneath it. Shadow lay beside her, his massive head resting gently across her legs. Joseph Greyfeather knelt across from them, his voice low and steady as he placed a carved wooden bowl between them. The herbs inside glowed faintly in the firelight. "This is not magic," Joseph said softly. "This is memory, the kind passed down in blood and bone." He reached forward, dipping his fingers into the smoke, then pressed them gently to Lily's marked wrist and the center of Shadow's broad chest. "Two spirits, one thread," he whispered. "Walk this path together. Heal, if it is the will of the old ones." Lily didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand slid into Shadow's thick fur, and the wolfdog gave a low, soft exhale, as if answering in his own language. The transplant. The following morning, Wildhaven was quieter than it had ever been. The medical team, a mix of pediatric specialists and veterinary experts, had transformed the lodge's research wing into a double surgical suite. State-of-the-art human equipment stood beside modified veterinary gear. It was a union of disciplines that had never been joined before. It was either brilliant science or madness. Dr. Logan Pierce stood at the center of it all, directing the synchronized procedures with unwavering focus. To either side of the partitioned room, Lily and Shadow lay sedated, their vitals monitored in real time. Rachel, Margaret, and Joseph waited just beyond the sterile glass, eyes fixed on the blinking monitors. As the hours ticked by, the team carefully harvested bone marrow from Shadow, extracting stem cells filtered for genetic compatibility with Lily's unique immune profile. From Lily, a small amount of her marrow was prepared to return to Shadow. His system, weakened but still responsive, awaited the transplant. What no one dared say aloud was the truth they all carried. If the transplants failed, both could die. The night passed slowly. Rachel barely moved from the glass, her eyes locked on Lily's face. Margaret sat beside her, a comforting hand never leaving her shoulder. Joseph murmured quiet prayers under his breath. And then, signs of change. Lily's white blood cell count, which had plummeted for weeks, began to climb, slowly, steadily. Her temperature stabilized. She stirred in her sleep. Across the room, Shadow's respiration deepened. His coat, once dull and patchy from treatment, seemed to catch the light again. 2 days later, Lily opened her eyes. Her first words were not to her mother or the doctors, but to the empty air. "He's awake." Moments later, Shadow's eyelids fluttered. His nose twitched, and when he was wheeled into the adjacent recovery pen, he lifted his head toward the glass, separating him from Lily, and gave a quiet, unmistakable whine. Over the following months, recovery was slow but remarkable. Lily endured round after round of supportive therapy. Her strength returned in fits and starts, but every time her motivation faltered, a visit from Shadow reignited her spirit. Sometimes she didn't speak, just sat beside his pen, sketching silently while he watched her with eyes that seemed older than time. Eventually, both were cleared for limited movement. With careful supervision, they resumed short walks around the sanctuary's private trails, first separately, then together. The first time Lily stepped into Shadow's enclosure, he approached her slowly. He sniffed her wrist, then pressed his muzzle gently to the mark beneath her sleeve. "You remembered," she whispered. By spring, Lily was running again, her laughter echoing through the pines like birdsong. Shadow, while graying at the muzzle, had regained nearly all his mobility and energy. He often sat outside the educational pavilion, where Lily now helped guide young visitors through their first encounters with the sanctuary's animals. Margaret established the Bridge program in Lily's name, a new branch of Wildhaven focused on therapeutic experiences for children with autism, PTSD, and emotional trauma. Lily, barely 7 years old, became its youngest ambassador. Frank Weston, now officially a consultant for Wildhaven, worked quietly behind the scenes, cataloging genetic lineages and ensuring that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Joseph remained close, teaching Lily not just about biology, but about heritage, about the legends and truths that live side by side in places like Wildhaven. And then there was the wolf pup, the smallest of Shadow's offspring. Born unexpectedly in the months after his procedure, she was different. While her siblings roughhoused and tested boundaries, this one watched Lily from afar, ears twitching at every sound she made. It took weeks before she approached, but when she did, She placed a paw on Lily's lap, mirroring the exact gesture Shadow had made years before. "She knows," Lily said softly. "She remembers the thread." The pup was named Ember. The legacy. One early summer evening, as twilight painted the trees in golden pink, Lily led a group of visiting students through the sanctuary. Shadow walked beside her, calm and sure, with Ember trailing just behind. Lily's wrist was bare, the beaded bracelet from Joseph long since worn smooth by time. But the mark was still there, faint but undeniable. She paused at the edge of the forest and looked back at the children. "Sometimes," she said, "we're born different. Not broken, just meant for something else." Shadow sat beside her, Ember curled at her feet. Together, the marked ones watched the sun disappear behind the pines. Two lives forever intertwined by blood, by bond, and by the unspoken promise of the wild.